Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the ongoing tussle between the central government and Twitter. We also take a quick look at the Home Minister Amit Shah's latest statement on the Citizenship Amendment Act. But first, we talk about the India-China standoff. It has now been more than 9 months since the standoff between India and China started along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. As we have discussed previously on the show, the Chinese have transgressed along at least 4 points on the LAC: Pangong Tso, the Galwan Valley area, Hot Springs, and Depsang. In the past, multiple rounds of talks have taken place between the two sides, but there hasn't been any significant headway. Until now, that is. This is because on Wednesday, we came to know about the first major breakthrough in talks to resolve the standoff. This is after the Chinese Defense Ministry announced that Chinese and Indian troops on the southern and northern shores of Pangong Tso began a synchronized and organized disengagement. And while we didn't hear anything from the Indian government about it on that day, on Thursday, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh made a statement about this disengagement process in the Rajya Sabha.
सभापति महोदय, मुझे सदन को यह बताते हुए खुशी हो रही है कि हमारे इस अप्रोच तथा सस्टेन्ड टॉक्स के फलस्वरूप चीन के साथ पैंगोंग लेक के नॉर्थ एवं साउथ बैंक पर डिसएंगेजमेंट का समझौता हो गया है और इस बात पर भी सभापति महोदय इस बात पर भी सहमत हो गई है कि पैंगोंग लेक से पूर्व पैंगोंग लेक से पूर्ण डिसएंगेजमेंट के 48 आवर्स के अंदर सीनियर कमांडर स्तर की बातचीत हो तथा बाकी बचे हुए मुद्दों पर भी हल निकाला जाए.
In this segment, we speak to Krishan Kaushik, who covers defense for the Indian Express, about the significance of this disengagement process in Pangong Tso, what it will involve, and the challenges ahead. Krishan, before we talk about anything else, could you first explain what exactly does disengagement mean in the context of a standoff like this? What is its significance?
So there are two aspects to resolving a crisis like this, a standoff like this, which has been going on since May last year. One is disengagement. Disengagement essentially means to pull back the troops that are on the front lines at the moment. Like in certain places in the north and south banks of Pangong Tso, Indian and Chinese troops are just a few hundred meters apart. So disengagement essentially means to bring these troops back from the face-off positions, to pull back a certain number of troops, even if you have not vacated them yet, to thin out a certain strength of the troops and bring them back. The other aspect of resolving such a crisis is actually the de-escalation, which is equally significant. De-escalation means that when the standoff began, soon after that, both sides started, building their military strength in the depth areas of the region, which means they're not on the front lines, they're slightly behind them. They can be used as reinforcements, they can be there for support. So they are basically to prevent or to come into action in case of a war. So the de-escalation means sending the troops who are in the depth areas and the additional military assets that were put there, sending them back to their original bases. So only after the disengagement is done will the de-escalation start. And only when the de-escalation is completed, we can confidently say that the crisis has been resolved.
So now when we talk about this synchronized and organized disengagement, that the Chinese Defense Ministry announced on Wednesday, what do we know about what that will involve?
So we have to understand that the current disengagement process is only about the north and south banks of Pangong Tso. Neither Defense Minister Rajnath Singh in his statement today, nor the Chinese Defense Ministry in its statement yesterday mentioned about the other friction areas. Now, what the disengagement will entail is it will include thinning of troops from the front lines and also bringing back certain tanks that were in face-off positions in the south bank of Pangong Tso. We are being told right now, the sources in the military establishment are saying that the disengagement of the tanks from the face-off positions in the South Pangong Tso is already completed today, and some thinning of troops from the front lines who were sitting on heights, in the south bank of the lake and in the north bank as well, they have started thinning. We have not vacated any of the heights yet, but the troops have started thinning now. There will be a phased and verified process. So after every phase, which will include thinning of a particular amount of troops from certain locations. It will be verified by both sides that this has taken place. Only then will the next phase of the disengagement start.
And considering this is only happening in the Pangong Tso area, how important and strategic is this location?
Pangong Tso is actually extremely important in the current standoff because the North Bank is where the standoff started. It was a scuffle between troops from both the sides around May 5 last year. And after that, the standoff really began. Another reason why it is important is because it was one of the areas that China had initially refused to discuss. It is also one of the areas where China had come in the deepest. According to India, the LAC passes through Finger 8. According to China, the LAC passes through Finger 4. The distance is about 8 kilometers between them. China had positioned its troops between Finger 8 and Finger 4 soon after May. So now that they have agreed to go back, and they have agreed to go back to Finger 8, east of Finger 8, and India's positions now will be the traditional base, which is that Dancing Thapa post, which is just west of Finger 3. And the disengagement will also include temporary suspension of patrolling by both sides. Now that they have agreed to go back from the Finger area, that marks a very significant breakthrough. Also, why it is also significant is because it was India's actions in August end when it outputted the Chinese troops to occupy some previously unoccupied heights in the south bank of the lake, including Mukhbari, Gurung Hill, Magar Hill, Rezangla, Rechinla. That gave India the strategic advantage. It gave India leverage for bargaining, which India lacked earlier. The positions India occupied in the South Bank region, they not only allowed India to dominate the Spanggur Gap, which is a 2-kilometer wide valley that can be used to launch an offensive, it also gave India a direct view of the Moldo garrison of China. China was extremely sensitive about this, and soon after this had taken place, India also readjusted its troops on the North Bank and occupied heights above where the Chinese troops were positioned on the Finger 4 ridgeline. So now it is in these areas where warning shots were fired, which is the first time in many, many decades between both sides. And the troops were really just a few hundred meters apart from each other. So that's why the disengagement from this area is extremely important.
Right. And what do we know about how this disengagement has come about?
Well, I mean, we have had 9 rounds of senior military commander level talks, which is like the corps commander from India's side met the corps commander from Chinese side. One thing to understand is this is not the first disengagement for the current standoff. First disengagement had started in June itself. And it was during the disengagement process that Indian and Chinese troops clashed in Galwan Valley on June 15th. In that, about 20 Indian soldiers had died. An undeclared number of Chinese soldiers were also killed. So that was also part of an initial disengagement. However, immediately after that, all disengagement had stopped because there was a very high trust deficit and the tensions were rising. Soon after that, however, in July, both sides had started disengaging again, and China pulled back from Galwan, and they took their troops back from Finger 4 to Finger 5. However, it still kept a particular strength of its troops on the Indian side of the LAC near PP-15, which is in Hot Springs, near PP-17 Alpha, which is in Gogra Post, and it refused to vacate the ridgeline of Finger 4 on the north bank of Pangong Tso. So this is the third time this is happening, and it is just starting, so everybody's a bit cautious at the moment. The trust deficit that is between both the sides is still there, so nobody has let their guard down, but it is a first step.
And what do you think took this long to get to this point? Like, it's been almost 9 months now. What do you think it took this long?
It's been more than 9 months now, of course. So initially, again, when China came and positioned its troops till Finger 4 in the north bank of the lake, India had nothing to bargain with, and China had refused to vacate. So that was the first stumbling block because India had nothing to leverage. It was only after India occupied the heights in the South Bank region that India got some leverage, and China became very sensitive to those positions of India, which also meant that trust deficit had actually increased when all these things were happening, including the Galwan Valley clashes. Sources have told us that while in principle both sides might have agreed for status quo ante or to go back to the April 2020 positions, but this trust gap really meant that neither side believed the other side or would take the first step to step back or to pull the troops back from the frontline positions. They were always very cautious that what happens if we pull back and the other side does not and even gains more ground. So that trust deficit was really what was one of the major stumbling blocks. Now it appears in the 9th round of talks between the corps commanders, a phased and a verified process of disengagement has been agreed upon, and that's where it is at the moment.
What are the challenges that come in the way of, like you mentioned earlier, possible de-escalation?
There are multiple challenges, as we saw previously as well. One of the sites can refuse to, complete the disengagement process, like we saw in July when China did not pull back its entire troops from some of the parts. Another stumbling block could be a confusion, like what happened in Galwan Valley, which was also part of the disengagement process. The third stumbling block could be that the trust deficit, which is still very high, that can mean that the either side might again, not trust the other side that they have completed the process, but which is why each of the phases will be verified. So, I mean, there are multiple pitfalls right now, and this is just the first step. And this first step will also take some time. However, as the defense minister today mentioned in the parliament, after this process is complete, the corps commanders will again meet within 48 hours and then start discussing the other parts and the other friction areas in the eastern Ladakh region, which also includes Tepsang Plains, which nobody has mentioned for this round of disengagement yet. Tepsang Plains is strategically very important for India. It's close to our Daulat Beg Oldie post, which is close to the Karakoram Pass in the north. And there, the Chinese are blocking Indians at a place called the Bottleneck, and Indian troops are unable to access 5 of their traditional patrolling points.
And next, we talk about the ongoing tussle between the central government and the microblogging platform Twitter. This tussle is over Twitter's response to the directives that have been sent by the center. Our producer Snigdha Sharma tells us more about it. Here's Snigdha.
Exactly a week ago, the IT ministry had sent Twitter a list of nearly 1,200 accounts that were posting about the farmer protests in India. The government asked Twitter to either suspend or block these accounts in the country. Now, these accounts, according to the government's notice, were flagged by security agencies as accounts of Khalistan sympathizers or backed by Pakistan. While initially Twitter suspended more than 500 accounts and withheld a portion of the accounts mentioned by the government, later on it did acknowledge that it had not taken any action on the accounts belonging to news organizations, journalists, activists, and politicians. The reason that the platform gave for doing so was that blocking these accounts would violate their fundamental right to free expression under the Indian law. Following this, there was a meeting between Twitter officials and officials from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, after which the ministry issued a strongly worded statement, which in other words meant that though Twitter is free to do business in India, it has to follow the law of the land. In this segment, we speak to Ashish Aryan, who reports on the IT sector for the Indian Express, about this ongoing tussle. Ashish began by giving us a brief background.
World over, if you see, governments have been pointing out how these social media platforms have assumed too much power within themselves, and how they believe that they can set the rules, or they can decide who to ban or who not to ban, or what to allow on their platforms as such. If we view it in the larger context, this is a part of such battles. But when it comes specifically to India, this is the first time that there were allegations by people from both sides of the aisle that Twitter favors this or Twitter favors that, and so on and so forth. But this is the first time that it has escalated on the government level. So just to recap for our listeners, on the January 31st, there was a hashtag trending on Twitter, which referred to farmer genocide, or which referred to the farmers or the activists tweeting that Prime Minister Modi wanted the farmers dead and he wanted a farmer genocide. And the IT ministry took severe umbrage of this hashtag trend, and it sent a notice to Twitter under Section 69 of the IT Act, and said that this is promoting enmity between people, and this could lead to severe unrest in the country, and therefore Twitter must immediately stop all such accounts and must block this hashtag from its platform, because as a platform, as an intermediary, it has those responsibilities to ensure that its platform is not used to fan unrest or even allow people who tweet things which could lead to social unrest. That's one part of it. And then this was on 31st of January, the first list of 257 accounts were sent, which Twitter responded by first it took down all those accounts, and then later it unblocked some of the accounts, and then gave an explanation to the IT ministry that it had taken down the accounts which it believed that were violating its platform policies. But then there were accounts of activists, politicians, or journalists and media houses which it believed were not violating the policies, and since the orders that had been sent by the government were not consistent with the internal policies it had about communications continuing to flow, it had blocked those accounts, but then again unblocked those accounts. That is the start. And then, of course, as we now know that on 4th of February, they sent a second list in which they had mentioned about 1,200 accounts.
So, Ashish, since we're talking about these accounts being blocked, right, there is this comparison that the government has drawn between Twitter's response to the Capitol Hill incident in Washington earlier in January, and what happened at the Red Fort on Republic Day, right? Now, one of the first things that Twitter did in the former case, that is in the US, was it blocked the president's account, Donald Trump's account. Now, can you draw the differences between the accounts that Twitter blocked following Capitol Hill and the ones that Government of India is asking Twitter to block?
So, Snigdha, if we compare both the instances in Capitol Hill, when unfortunately the rioters took over the Capitol Hill and they started, breaking things, there was fire and the police had to step in. So, what Twitter did, that suo motu on its own, it blocked out 70,000 accounts which were related to conspiracy theorists believing that there were certain things that was not right with the White House and so on and so forth. And then it went one step ahead and it also blocked the account, like you rightly said, it also blocked the account of former US President Donald Trump. Blocked is not the right word to use because they said that it is permanently suspended. And, last night they've, reiterated that even if he runs for a presidency in 2024, will still keep his account blocked. So that was a very strong reaction. Although some critics do say that Twitter took all these steps only when they were assured that there would be no penal action against Twitter and that a transfer of powers had already happened. That is when, platforms like Twitter or Facebook, they blocked such conspiracy theorists or even former US President Donald Trump from their platforms. Coming back to India, the IT ministry, when it met senior executives from Twitter last evening, they said that, compared to the response that you had after a similar incident in the US, we believe that the response that you had, because there, you blocked accounts on your own because they were indulging in violence. Here, despite our flagging that these accounts could be indulging in violence and they could be, tweeting out stuff which could fan hatred among the people, you did not take an appropriate action or a proportionate action. Our sources at IT ministry have also indicated that senior IT ministry officials who were in the meeting, they in very certain terms told that this differential treatment of how Twitter reacted to public disturbance event in the US and a public disturbance event in India was very different.
Ashish, to what extent is the government's accusation of Twitter being biased true?
I mean, most of the experts that we talk to and some of the legal experts that we talk to, they are of the opinion that irrespective of whatever problems that Twitter had with the government's notices that were sent, it could not have been a deciding unit and it could not have been sitting in judgment over what was right and what was wrong. If it had a problem with whatever was sent by the IT ministry, there are courts of law in the country where they could have gone and challenged that we have been sent these notices, but we do not think that these notices are in line or in spirit of the Indian Constitution, which guarantees you freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
Like you said, even in your report, you mentioned that the statement that was released after the meeting between government officials and Twitter, the ministry said, and I'm quoting, lawfully passed orders are binding on any business entity. They must be obeyed immediately. If they are executed days later, it becomes meaningless. So in what way has Twitter, according to the government of India, bypassed the law in this case?
From what we gather from the officials and from sources, the ministry claims that for the first time when we sent a list on January 31st, when they sent a list of 257 accounts. So some of them were blocked immediately, as is the norm. But then the other accounts, they were unblocked subsequently. So the IT ministry says that nothing gave you the power to decide that, you could unblock these accounts without informing us or without telling us why you are unblocking them. And without an order from a court of law, you could not have assumed the role of judiciary in deciding what was to be done next.
One of the personalities who has shown support to the farmers is the climate activist Greta Thunberg. In response to her support, we saw her effigies being burnt as well. Her name came up during this meeting as well with Twitter officials. The IT secretary said that the toolkit shared by climate activist Greta Thunberg had made it evident that a strong social media campaign around the farmer protest was planned in a foreign country. Ashish, if you can tell us, what was this toolkit and what was the purpose behind it?
If we go a little back and try to explain them what is a toolkit or where does the idea originate from, when there's a crowd-funded protest going on against a government, a toolkit is essentially a set of guidelines or suggestions that is released out to the protesters, saying that maybe you could do this or maybe you could do that. These toolkits, again, they are also crowdsourced, so everyone pitches in with an idea on how best to approach the protest that is going on. For example, if you remember about a decade ago, there were Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011, or maybe even Hong Kong protests, which happened a couple of years ago. So in all these protests, the protesters, since they were faced with the state machinery, to better organize and to better inform people of what they could do and how they could approach the high-handedness of the government that was in power in the respective places, they had shared a sort of, how to or to-do list of what you could do first and then what you could do or what should people not do, and, so on and so forth. A similar toolkit, it was shared by Greta on Twitter. And then this toolkit, the Indian government officials and the ministers in the Indian government and the supporters of the government, they immediately took umbrage that the things that are mentioned in the toolkit, it clearly shows that there is a conspiracy against the government, because the toolkit maybe mentioned that, you could call the government or send them several emails, all with similar mail bodies or similar content in the mail. And then maybe you could, go to certain websites or appeal certain foreign governments and ask them that as a responsible government, you must talk to your counterparts in the Indian government and tell them that whatever they are doing in India is not right, is not fair.
We know that for platforms like Facebook and Twitter, India is one of the biggest markets, right?
Yeah.
What does this mean for Twitter in terms of business in India?
Like you rightly said, India is one of the biggest markets for Twitter. And not only Twitter, given the population and given the fact that a large chunk of population, every year they hop onto the internet bandwagon, a large chunk of population has started using Twitter and using other social media platforms such as Facebook or Instagram and so on and so forth. So obviously, Twitter has grown excessively and in large numbers, in India. And that could be one of the reasons why there was such a swift response from Twitter's side also, when they said that they had reached out to the government to initiate a formal dialogue. And they did not want a situation where violence was propagated from their platform. And therefore, with such a big database or with such a large user base, it becomes extremely important for platforms like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, while ensuring that their users have the right freedom of speech and expression, also ensure that their platforms are not misused.
My last question to you, Ashish. Has there been any response from Twitter after this meeting, any official response?
So if we talk about the response from Twitter after the meeting, there has been no response as such from the platform.
And finally, we talk about Home Minister Amit Shah and his latest rally in Matwa under the BJP's Parivartan Yatra for the upcoming Bengal elections. From accusing West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee and her nephew and TMC leader Abhishek Banerjee of corruption to holding the CM responsible for the centre's development schemes not reaching Bengal, in his speech, Amit Shah took multiple pot shots at Mamata Banerjee. He said that the Bengal Assembly elections will be a fight between Narendra Modi's development model and Mamata Banerjee's destruction model. Notably, the BJP leader also promised to grant citizenship to refugees in West Bengal under the Citizenship Amendment Act after the COVID vaccination drive was over.
मैं आज इस पवित्र भूमि पर वादा कर जाता हूं, जैसे ही ये वैक्सीनेशन का काम समाप्त होता है, जैसे ही कोरोना से मुक्ति मिलती है, आप सभी को नागरिकता देने का काम भारतीय जनता पार्टी की सरकार समाप्त।
In his series of pre-election promises, Amit Shah also said that after it forms the government in West Bengal, the BJP will spend 500 crore rupees to build a Rajbangshi cultural center in the region as a tribute to the legends of the Rajbangshi community. He also promised to build a tourist circuit which will have the Madan Mohan Mandir in Cooch Behar and other mandirs from the region as well. You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and Snigdha Sharma, and was edited by Anantnath Sharma and mixed by Joshua Thomas. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.